There's a lot about Michael Jackson's life that continues to be misunderstood or even unknown. In our previous video, we covered the topic of Michael's vitiligo because to this day, there's still a lot of people that don't know that Michael actually had vitiligo, and they aren't fully aware of how the disease works and how it affects you, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. Now we're going to take a look at another condition Michael dealt with behind the scenes that he didn't really let people know of. Lupus. Unlike his vitiligo, which Michael spoke about on national television, Michael actually never publicly addressed having lupus, so we'll have to rely on his doctor reports to help us tell the story. But let's first start with a breakdown of what lupus is and how it affects your body. For those that don't know, lupus is an autoimmune disease in which your immune system basically attacks itself. It attacks your body. It attacks your tissue, your lungs, your limbs, your joints, your kidneys. It's a very tough disease to deal with. One of the most common distinguishable signs of a person having lupus is something called a butterfly rash, which is essentially a rash on your cheeks that takes the shape of a butterfly or a butterfly pattern, so to speak. So it kind of goes like this. Sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's a little smaller, but it's easily identifiable, quite noticeable. And most of the time it's red because it's a sign of inflammation. If you take a look at pictures of Michael throughout the 1980s specifically, you will find quite a few pictures that show this butterfly rash very clearly. Now, it should be noted that once a person has one autoimmune disease, it can be the catalyst for a person developing a secondary autoimmune disease or activating one that's been lying dormant or maybe hasn't been as bad or in remission, etc., etc. So in that way, it's not uncommon for people to have vitiligo and lupus as well, which is the case with Michael. Now, Michael didn't receive a diagnosis for his lupus until sometime around 1983, which was noted by his then doctor, Dr. Stephen Hoffman, when he did the medical report for Michael following his 1984 Pepsi burn. In that report, which you can see behind me, Dr. Hoffman notes that Michael had just recently gotten the lupus diagnosis and that one of the symptoms that he, Dr. Hoffman, was noticing at that specific moment was scalp flakiness and dryness, which leads us back to some of the physical ailments that lupus can cause. Aside from the butterfly rashes that we just discussed, people with lupus can also suffer from skin lesions, which can be quite painful to deal with at times, hyperpigmentation, skin discoloration, and even sun sensitivity, which should give you some insight into what Michael was dealing with having both vitiligo and lupus at the same time, because both are conditions that can make your skin very, very sensitive to the sun. It can result in burns. It can result in skin cancer. A lot of times people with both have to use umbrellas like how Michael did. So that kind of tells you what all he was dealing with. Additionally, when under periods of stress, emotional duress, or even when it's just simply way too cold outside, lupus sufferers can have their fingertips and toes turn white or blue, and they also can have an issue with their hair falling out, especially, again, if it's an emotional time or a stressful time within their lives. So a lot of lupus patients have resulted in clumps of hair falling out, and it can even get a little bit deeper into that because sometimes if a skin lesion actually scars your tissue in your scalp, it can result in you never being able to grow back hair in that area. So of course, this is on top of the Pepsi burn, which already, because of the third-degree burns that Michael suffered, had made him unable to grow hair in a certain area or in the place that he was burned rather to begin with. Now, in her testimony for the 2013 AEG trial, Michael's second wife and former nurse, Debbie Rowe, testified that they were able to officially diagnose him by way of a biopsy. But Michael was actually showing signs of having lupus years before that. Now, a common condition associated with lupus is a condition known as pleurisy, which is when your lungs become chronically inflamed. Back in 1977, when Michael was around 18, 19 years old, he had a scary incident where one of his lungs collapsed. Of course, that is a symptom of pleurisy. So looking back, it was probably a very early sign that Michael was dealing with lupus. Additionally, Michael was confirmed to have been on prednisone, which is one of the most common medications used for treating lupus. Michael being confirmed to have had lupus helps us transition to another common misconception when it comes to him. During the 1993 allegation, a doctor by the name of Richard Strick was hired and court-ordered to look over Michael's medical records. In doing so, Dr. Strick came to the conclusion that most of Michael's cosmetic surgery was reconstructive. Let's back it up for a second. What does that mean? Back in 1979, Michael had an accident while rehearsing where he fell off a stage and broke his nose, therefore leading to him having a nose job. Now, what Michael and his doctors did not know at that point was that he had lupus. So he had this surgery done, and essentially his nose, or the scar tissue and skin tissue within his nose, never properly healed. And as a result of it never properly healing, he began having complications, not just with the overall healing process, but even with his ability to breathe. So this sort of put Michael in a vicious cycle where he would have reconstructive surgery to rebuild the scar tissue or to try to breathe better, and then it wouldn't heal properly, and then it would kind of be back to square one. And this same pattern could be seen when it came to Michael's scalp burn as well, because the doctors that he had, or some of the doctors that he had rather, perhaps it was because of the time period and them not really knowing how to deal with it or what the best course of action was, but Michael would have a lot of pain in the scalp tissue never properly healed. A doctor would recommend doing this procedure, putting a balloon in his scalp, different things that just ultimately didn't end up working because the scalp tissue would never properly heal. So unfortunately, these were things that Michael had to keep dealing with throughout the course of his life. So that is what Dr. Strick meant when he said that most of Michael's operations or procedures were a matter of reconstructive work. As you can imagine, lupus is a very difficult disease to deal with. And while Michael may not have addressed having it publicly, he did showcase his support in October 2003 when he attended a lupus charity event. There's plenty more stories to cover when it comes to Michael's life and legacy. We'll be talking about those stories here in the near future. But in the meantime, thanks for tuning in. And remember, facts don't lie, but people do.